Welcome back. We are here to talk about lack of healthy boundaries today. Ned and Kelly and I, as you guys know, we like to tackle topics that come up a lot with the clients that we're working with and things that we see that are really relevant and really pervasive. And this is something that we have talked about before. It's been a while, but we want to talk about this again because while it seems really counterintuitive, the healthier and the stronger the boundaries, the greater intimacy we can actually have.
Yeah.
So I think this is really foundational for a healthy relationship. The most loving people that I know, the most compassionate people, are the most boundaried because they're secure in their boundaries. They know what's theirs. They know what's not theirs to hold. So they're not in a place of anxiety around it. And so they're able to be really generous. And if you think of people who are really strong and generous and loving and kind, they're probably somebody who has an easier time than your average person saying no to things that aren't a match for them, or containing themselves and staying in their own lane and not stepping into codependency. So today what we're going to talk about, and Ned and Kelly, I'm so glad that you're here again talking about this with me. We're going to talk about what are boundaries? What are they actually? Like, how do we define them? What are healthy boundaries? What are unhealthy boundaries? What are some really great ways to conceptualize boundaries that make it a little bit easier to gauge where we are at, if we're in a healthy place or not? We're going to talk about the signs and symptoms of not having good boundaries, like some of the things that we notice in working with clients, things that I hear from the very first phone call that would suggest to me that there's a boundary issue, even if they don't realize that that's what it's connected to. And then, all the different ways that it shows up. And then we're going to talk about what you can do to strengthen your boundaries.
Yeah.
So welcome, you guys.
We're happy to be here as always.
Definitely.
Yeah, this is a good topic.
Yeah,
So
great topic.
Yeah.
Good topic. And I want to say that to everyone listening is that the lack of boundaries is really what gets people in the place where their marriages are on the brink, where they wake up and they're like, how did I get to this place in my marriage? And it's because of the lack of boundaries. And we're going to go into what it looks like and sounds like in all of the different ways that it shows up. But
yes,
it causes a lot of suffering that's not necessary when we don't have that resource of having really good, healthy boundaries.
mm-hmm.
So
yes,
listen,
absolutely.
Well, I do want to say something else too, Monika, because
Sure.
I don't want people to overlook the point that you made, that it is very counterintuitive. It feels very counterintuitive to think about having boundaries. And I think that is a cultural thing.
Yeah.
Because that is a really important point, because when you start exercising them, they're super uncomfortable, not only for yourself, but for people you're exercising and using them with.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You understand what I'm saying? And I want to understand that as we talk about this, because this is a huge deal, because it is such a problem that.
Yeah. And it's not just like a pathological thing that's just an individual thing. So don't feel like there's something wrong with you. It's actually something that we pick up on from everything around us. And you're going against the grain, I think, a lot of times when you start to set healthy boundaries.
Right.
So when you look at it in a more social context, it doesn't feel as pathologizing or like, oh, there's something wrong with me as an individual or my psyche. It's like, no, we've just learned these things that are not serving us as we up-level our relationships and as we up-level our lives.
Exactly.
Good point.
Yeah.
Very good point.
So what do you want to say about like how you guys would define boundaries? There are lots of definitions out there.
So the way we define it is, and we get this from Dr. Terry Real, who's our teacher and mentor in RLT, and which is one of the modalities we use inside of the couples cure with clients. And he describes a boundary as where I end and where you begin. Also in reference to internal boundaries, a boundary can be where I begin and end within myself,
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not willing to allow outside of myself and foist onto any other person, right? So
Yeah.
It can be an
And that's really important because a lot of times we forget the piece of boundaries. So external boundaries are like when that's the line between us and another person. You can imagine this invisible line, and if they cross it or if you cross it, that's a boundary violation. But what we forget about is like inside our own selves, like the line that we don't let ourselves spill past.
Exactly. Yeah.
And really what that means is not letting our stuff become another person's stuff.
Exactly. Because that's, I mean, and to put that into context, if you think about that, let's say you've had a discussion with your partner and you supposedly have a boundary up, and your partner crosses that. Where a lot of people find themselves getting in trouble is where if it turns into an argument, one way to fuel that argument is to go outside your personal boundaries and go over into and spill. And that's where we're talking about, you really have to have a healthy boundary within yourself, because if you notice that your partner has crossed the boundary, the thing not to do is to cross that same boundary over into their area. You want to stay within yourself and keep that part of yourself and stay focused on yourself and not cross that boundary, because that won't fuel the argument further. Okay, so this person has to deal with themselves around that. You don't step into that zone. But it's a huge point to make around that, because that's where a lot of people find themselves getting in trouble, and they're not aware of it also.
Yeah. 100%. And when we're getting our own dysfunction mixed in with our partner's dysfunction, they're not going to be able to see their own
exactly
clearly because it's mixed up. So you got to take yours out of their space, take your dysfunction out of theirs, then they can see it more clearly. So in a way, like we think that we're losing impact or influence by staying in our lane. We feel like we're losing power, but actually we get more of what we want by holding a good boundary and staying in our lane. And it actually, we're doing our spouse a disservice if we don't allow them to see themselves clearly because we're all over in their stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we're speaking very vaguely right now. Let's get into, I think people that already sort of understand this and maybe done some foundational work on this get what we're saying, but it may still be very abstract for people that are new to this concept. So how would you describe like how it looks? Like obviously we're imagining a line between us, something that can contain us and where we're not hurting another person with our words and our actions and spilling out onto them and vice versa. But how would you describe like what it really looks like from a standpoint of a healthy boundary, internally and externally? And I think, Kelly, you had mentioned something really about there's like healthy boundaries, there's unhealthy boundaries, and then there's boundarylessness.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about that?
Yes. So healthy boundary in general is a personal limit, right? That you have for yourself that keeps you healthy, keeps you happy. It's like, this is the containing boundary. This is what I'm not going to allow onto anyone else. I'm going to work with myself when I'm triggered. I'm not going to spew it onto anyone else. And then this is the external boundary, right? So anyone outside of myself, if it's not true for me, it's just going to bounce off. If I care about what you have to say, I might let it in. I might let it affect me. I might think about it, right? But if not, it's going to bounce off. And that's a large part of what we teach people inside of the program, is how to have the internal containing boundary and the external. So those are the healthy, that's how you kind of explain.
It's not a wall, it's a fence. You can open the door, let things in and out. You can close the door.
Right.
But it's not a wall where nothing can get in.
Right. I like to call it like a bubble. Let it in the bubble, or it's going to stay outside of it. Unhealthy boundaries are when you're walled off. Like, this is what love avoidance do. They go and they live behind a wall. And it's like, a fortress. You cannot get in. And this wall keeps you really shut away from others in your life. They cannot penetrate, and it's just, you live behind that wall.
Yeah.
And super unhealthy, and it's really a low vibe place to live, of shame and guilt and fear. And people who were really intruded upon a lot as young children typically live in this place of love avoidance and living behind walls. It's how they adapt a lot to the enmeshment they avoid.
Yeah.
So that would be considered unhealthy boundaries, are walls that you live behind. Not wanting to, a lot of people who say they don't like confrontation or conflict, that's another version of what that looks like.
And I think that's surprising for a lot of people too. Sorry to interrupt, but I want to highlight that because I think we think of boundaries as crossing lines, but it's a boundary failure to not come up to the line even.
Exactly.
Right? What we're talking about is the opposite. The avoidants are not transgressing by crossing your lines and disregarding your boundaries, but they don't even come up to the line, so you can't even be close to them.
Right.
Healthy boundaries are like two cells with a membrane, and they're up against each other.
Yeah.
They're separate, but they're very close.
Yeah.
And so what you're describing is like really far away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Terry says, that's one of the big factors that creates the pursuer distancer relationship and for a lot of couples. If your partner's not even willing to come to the line, often that makes you feel like you need to chase them.
Yeah.
Them to get some response.
Well, it's like they have to learn how to come out from behind the wall.
Right.
Yeah. And it's a cycle too, right? Because the more one person pulls back from the line, the more the other person wants to cross the line to try to connect.
Right.
Which you can understand, but the more that they do that, then the more that the avoidant person avoids, and it just is round and round.
Yeah.
So both people have to do their work. The boundary crosser has to stay back and withstand the discomfort of not being connected for a while until the avoidant person recognizes that they have their own need to want to be attached and connected, and so that they can stick their neck out a little bit and come closer to the line.
Right.
Yeah. And then you've got the no boundaries, the boundaryless people. And this is when a person just has zero boundaries. And then
those are folks that are like really intrusive, right? Like walk into a room and just immediately, and they're stressed about something. They expect everybody to stop what they're doing and deal with their thing because they take up space, right? Are you talking about boundarylessness as like boundary crosser type of person?
Boundary
not recognizing,
violating, it can look like, and the boundaryless ones, and I can speak because I fall in the category of boundarylessness when I'm in my flavors of dysfunction and operating from that place. It's the chasing, the pursuing, let's talk about that right now. The person, feels flooded and needs a break or a timeout, and a boundaryless person's like, no, we're going to talk about this now, like super controlling, like super,
Another aspect of that could be unbridled expression that goes along with that. It's just speaking out of terms, speaking out of outside of, calling your partner names. Anything that there
are a lot of versions of boundarylessness.
Yes, there are, but that is a huge. I think about that because we had our own stuff, so it makes me think about that. But that's
unbridled self-expression is a great example of boundarylessness because you're just spilling out and you feel justified.
Right.
Yeah, and how does it show up? And we've already kind of gotten into that. But Monika, you had mentioned earlier, like people who feel hurt, like getting their feelings hurt a lot is boundarylessness. It could look like this. It hurts so much that you would think that about me, or that you would say that. There's a difference between feeling your feelings about something. We're human beings. We're going to have feelings and emotions. They're meant to be felt and move through us. But there's a difference between feeling your feelings and then making someone else's stuff about you.
Yeah. That's a great example. So if somebody has feedback for you, or they make a request of you, poor boundaries would look like, oh, I must have done something wrong. Like whatever it is that they want, whatever it is that their ask is or their feelings is about me. It's connected. So there's no line there. It's like, no, they're just sharing about themselves,
Mhm.
and we don't have to own that. Another example I think that sort of piggybacks on that is when one person wants to be a fixer and feel like if something is going on and my partner's having a bad day, I need to fix that, because if they're not okay, then I'm not okay. If they're having a bad day, I'm having a bad day.
Yeah.
Their stuff is my stuff, and I'm
Right.
responsible, and I expect them to be responsible for my feelings too.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's a huge one. Is
And a huge part of that, and a huge problem around that is, and the person who's doing that doesn't feel this way, but the person who they're doing it to does. It feels controlling.
Mm-hmm.
It feels very
Mm-hmm.
controlling to the individual that have
Mhm.
exactly that experience with that person, because a lot of what they almost feel like they can't be themselves sometimes, because your partner's trying to change
Your emotional response to something.
yeah, so that they feel better.
Yeah,
You know?
it becomes controlling it, because it's like, oh, I'm not allowed to feel the way that I'm feeling or have the reaction I'm having or just have a bad day, because then my partner will feel like it's about them, and I have to be a certain way so that they're okay, or they have to show up a certain way so that I'm okay.
Exactly.
That's codependency, right?
Yes.
That's classically poor
It is.
boundaries.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Mhm.
yeah.
So what else does it like, what are the things that you guys notice? What are the top things? Cause like sometimes when I'm talking to somebody right away, like I'll hear something that tells me this is a boundary issue, and they might not recognize that. What do you notice about that? What, is there something that tells you like, okay, we need to put some better boundaries into place here?
It's usually the ladies. Um, I usually pick up on this when we're talking to them about specific situations with their husbands. Um, a lot of ladies don't feel like they can be heard, or that they're allowed to express themselves, and rather than having a healthy boundary for themselves, where they bring that to their husband's attention, okay, and let them know, no, I'm allowed to speak. I can have my experience, and I can say what I want to say. And it's not specifically letting your husband know that his job is to do this, but everyone's allowed to have their experience. And
Mhm.
healthy relationship boundaries creates an atmosphere where there's validating around that experience. Okay, that
Mhm.
person in a healthy relationship deserves to be heard and understood for what experience they're having. Okay.
Mhm.
A lot of times that's not the case for a lot of ladies when I'm listening to them talk about the problem dynamic in the relationship. But the only part about that is a lot of times they think it's them.
Mhm. Yeah, taking ownership of something that isn't theirs is a great
Yeah.
example,
Yeah.
and not feeling like they have a voice.
Exactly.
Not That's a big sign. If you don't feel like your voice is heard, that's a boundary issue.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, that sense of like yours is mine and mine is yours, and it starts to get really blurry. Now, it's nice when you can care and you can be generous and loving, and you can step in if you want to help somebody out. But
Mhm.
it's different when you're doing it from a place of like, I'm doing this as a loving, caring spouse because I want to help this person who I love, versus I have to, or that's the only way, or if I don't, then it's my fault kind of thing.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Totally. Another thing that I noticed too that always is a red flag for me around boundaries is if I hear a lot of resentment and I hear somebody saying, like just the other day, I was listening to a call for training reasons, and I heard the person saying, there's never any consequences for him. There's no consequences.
Mm.
And so there was this sense of like, what this person is doing is impacting me, but they don't feel the outcome of their actions.
Mm.
To me, that's a boundary issue, because either you're letting things happen and you're crossing your own boundaries and then you're resenting this person as a result. You haven't found your leverage. You find your leverage in a relationship through boundaries. But when there's a lot of resentment, I feel like there's somebody there that's crossing their own boundaries or allowing that to happen because they were taught that that's what they should do or have to do. And so then they're left with this feeling of like, I'm giving too much. I'm going past my limits and I'm paying the price. And the other person is working great for them, but it's not working great for me. And I don't have a choice and I'm stuck. And no matter what I say, nothing changes.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a good one.
It doesn't sound on the surface like a boundary issue, but it is.
Yeah.
That's a really good one.
Another big one that shows up is partners who are talking about their experience. It's kind of like when Deb was saying, like, a healthy relationship it's a safe place for both partners to share what their experience is. And that's a lot of what we teach inside the program is how to do that, how to allow your partner to have their experience and validate it and be okay with them having their experience. And it happens so often that there are partners who can't allow their partners to have their experience without feeling attacked and then attacking back. So that's a really common dynamic we see a lot with people when they come into the program. Another one that we see a lot is around like money issues, parenting issues. Those are big hot button topics for couples before they come into the program, where it's like one person is like really tight and it's like too boundaried, and then the other person is like too loose, no boundaries. So it's like bring people into the middle where they can have some middle ground and get on the same team is also a large part of what we do once people come into the program as well. That's something we see a lot with the money and the parenting.
Yeah. And I think that's connected to this belief that if we don't see things the same way, then we can't collaborate. We can't figure this out. We can't work as a team. We can't have these differences because if we have these differences, then there's a belief that you can't have a good relationship if you have a different vantage point. Like that in of itself is reflective of a poor boundaries. Like I don't want you to have the experience that you're having because of what I think it means about us or because of what I think it means about me or what I think you're saying about me. And so then what happens is people will want to correct that and say, no, that's not it. Or that's not how I see it at all. And it's almost like a negating, like it doesn't matter. You don't have to position yourself against someone else's experience. They're just sharing your experience. When you have strong internal boundaries, it's easy to hear what somebody's sharing as they're telling me, they're revealing something about who they are, what they need, what their raw spots are. They're sharing about themselves. And if I just get myself out of the way and just hear that as like, this is revealing about them and not me, then that is an example of what a good boundary would look like. That is hard to do if you grew up in an environment that did not support that.
And a lot of times I see it, it goes a step further if you're not able to address that and we start getting into healthy strategies like the need to be right. So we start losing focus about what the issue is, and then we want to prove our point because we don't feel like because we don't have boundaries for ourselves, and we want to voice our idea, like this is what is correct. About this situation. It's just like, no, there's a collaboration. All right, you're allowed to have your own opinion and feelings, and if a healthy person will hear that, interject their own opinion, and the idea is to resolve that between the two of you around the differences of opinion. But the boundarylessness is the thing that makes you only see one perspective.
Yes, exactly.
It's the only one that's right. So
not just the boundarylessness, but even the walled off, unhealthy, like too boundaried people can have that perspective also. Like my way is the only way. It's the only thing that's right. It's both sides of the coin on that one.
And the whole idea of getting to a place of being a we or an us is the idea that what each of us brings is valuable and we can incorporate both
Exactly.
into a solution, as opposed to the traditional idea of compromise. Like somebody has to give up something really important to them as opposed to what if we could bring in what each of us cares about in this situation and find a solution that honors both,
That's what I
then
said.
the whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts. That's the definition of interdependence. You know, when they talk about dependency, then independence is the next step of evolution, and that's a step in the right direction to become independent. But then you stay in the walled off position of me versus you. The next level is now we're so secure in our boundaries. We're so secure in our own, you know, we're owning what we care about, what our values are, what our requests are, what our feelings are, what our needs are. And if we, and I honor my partner for theirs as well, even though they're different, if we can come together, then it's powerful.
It is.
That's where you get into like power couple mode, where it's like there's nothing you can't do if you're on the same team together. But it's we do ourselves a disservice by feeling like we have to be the same and just eliminate that line between the two of us.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
That's
Or
a
that
really-
we have to be right. Like our version has to be right. And it's like, it doesn't matter.
And
Like,
it limits you. It actually limits you if you hang on to that too tightly, right? Because then you miss out on what somebody else might have to offer and bring a different way, you know?
yeah, who's wrong, who's right?
Yeah.
Who cares? What matters is how are you guys going to get through this and get to the other side of it in a way that works for both of you. I mean, really, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter whose version is right or wrong, because everybody has a totally different lens and way they view things. I mean, we're not all going to agree, especially in an
You can
intimate.
both be right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can both. You're both right. Everyone has their perception and their subjective view on things, and you have to allow in a healthy, intimate relationship. You have to allow space for that with
Right.
one another.
Yeah.
It's not even optional.
Right.
No. It reminds me of that, you know, when you think about the health of, I think we've talked about this before, the health of an organism or the body. To have a healthy body and have a strong immune system, your immune system has to know the difference between you and another, like a foreign body. What is it supposed to attack? What is not me that is a potential threat?
Mm.
And when you don't know who you are and you don't know where the line is, then you end up attacking yourself. Like you might perceive something that is you as the enemy, or it might be the other way around, right? So, and that's what an autoimmune disorder is, isn't it? Like where your body starts to attack parts of yourself because it doesn't know the difference between who you are and what isn't you. So in the same way, us as human beings, the healthier that we are in our boundaries, the more that we can function in the same way that a healthy body functions as a conglomerate of cells and organs, and everything is working together, even though they're separate, distinct entities, but they work together. I feel like people can do the same thing if we can, but we have to be really secure within ourselves to be able to do that.
Exactly.
Otherwise, you want to go back to that immature place of symbiosis and merging and blurring the line and oneness, which can feel so amazing when you're first falling in love. But when you think in terms of building something for the long term, you have to be able to move between those two states.
Yes.
And it actually, this is about, the whole reason we're talking about this is to increase connection and to increase functionality as a unit in the relationship.
Right.
That's what it's all about.
It is.
You can just accomplish so much more. The other thing I noticed too is, and you guys I'm sure see this, is that when you hear somebody in blame a lot, we know they're in poor boundaries.
Yeah.
Right? Because what is blame? Blame is making someone else responsible for something on your side of the street.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you have good boundaries, you're not as likely to blame.
Yeah. And the piece around, and this is hard for everyone when they first start this work, it's like when we're blaming and we're playing the blame game, we're totally giving away our power. You know, we're saying life is happening to me. I am not the creator of my life and my reality and my circumstances. It's someone else. It's always someone else's fault. It's always something outside of me. And it's like, no, like you have to own this, right? Because like you chose this person, you decided to marry them, like you're in this situation, you co-created this,
Right.
like you, right? So
And it feels good to remember that in a way. Some people feel like that's like blaming, reverse blame, but it's actually just a way of saying,
mm-mm.
um, like I'm strong and I can make different choices, and this doesn't have to be what determines my quality of life or happiness.
Right. Right.
Exactly.
Like I got myself here in my life and where I am now. And like I'm the only one who can change where I am.
You're right.
Mhm.
That's the ownership piece. And when we take the blame and we just sit with ourselves, it's a much more empowering feeling. It's a little it's one of those bitter pills that you have to swallow. But once you swallow it and it goes down and you're like, you know what, I created this. I have to create the marriage that I want, the life that I want. Very, very empowering.
Yeah.
It gives you energy, it gives you hope, it gives you the idea that you could actually change it. You know what I mean? Because if you don't think you can change it, you're just going to feel trapped all the time.
Yeah.
And I think that's a psychological boundary issue.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, I think it's a good reminder for people to hear that, because I know for a long time, prior to me meeting Kelly, and my outlook on the world through the lens of a victim, nothing changes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, nothing
You
would
can be
change.
right. You can be right, or but it's not going to change. So how does that serve you?
Yeah, exactly. But it's specifically in relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because I mean, the only way that things change in the relationship dynamic in a positive way is if you do take ownership. If you play victim, nothing will change positively. It will always be negative. And that,
Right.
and so that creates the demise a lot of people find themselves in, or they feel trapped because they are victims again to the circumstance. So for me, that was a huge turn, just in that part of my psyche, and in my relationship with my wife, makes things a whole lot easier for us,
Yeah.
big time, and a lot more positive.
It opens up a whole new world of possibilities once you get to that place, 100%.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it comes from childhood. It comes from like, there probably was a time where you were victimized. There was a time when that you didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
But part of having healthy boundaries is maturing and getting to a place of recognizing no one really has the power anymore. Because now I'm a grown up and I can choose the environments that I'm in. I can
Right.
take myself out of environments that aren't healthy. I can recognize the human tendency to recreate our experiences
Exactly.
and make a different choice
Yeah.
and say, well, that might be my hardwiring, but I don't have to do that anymore. And so I don't even see healthy boundaries as separate from individuation and maturing and
Right.
not letting the adaptive child run the show.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the reason why I bring that up is because, as coaches, and we talk to people about this, it can feel insensitive when someone is telling you and they're calling you out about that specific behavior as it pertains to the dysfunction in your relationship.
Yeah.
And so it's hard for a lot of people to sit in the fact that they are creating this and own it.
Mhm.
It's really
It-
hard.
Almost like an illusion.
yeah, it takes some time for people to get to fully understand what that means in your relationship dynamic. And it starts with the ownership. That's the only thing that's going to change it. Okay.
Mhm.
You
Exactly.
have to own it, and so
And that means changing your part in it.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So whatever part you play, even if it's 1%, that's where your power is.
Right on.
Also, I think there's so many examples, but like defensiveness, I think we talked about that, not being able to hear another person's experience. But also like the passive aggressive thing, um, trying to get your needs met without having to speak them.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Oh yeah.
It's just another way. It's just a different way of going. It's a flip side of the same coin as blame. You're just trying to facilitate getting your needs met more indirectly,
Yeah.
but it still operates from the assumption that I need them to be doing something differently in order for me to feel okay. And so I'm just not going to be direct about it. I'm going to hope that
they get it.
they
Or
get the hint.
yeah,
Yes.
they take the hint, and I'm just like, they are not in your brain, honey. You have to say it straight up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But people don't want to do that because they don't want to be disappointed. Well, what if I put it out there and they don't do it? Then that just reinforces my own limiting beliefs
Right.
that I might come to the relationship with already, and it feels really sad and hurtful. And I'm going to make all this meaning out of it. So I'm not even going to take that chance.
Mm.
And a lot of women, you know, in this culture still are super programmed to do that, to be very covert, to not really just be very direct, because there's this belief that if you're direct somehow as a woman, that it's like rude or it's brash or it's you know, it's not a good quality to have. But that's just nonsense, because you have to like tell people what it is that you're making up about things, how you feel about things, and like what will work better for you.
Right.
You know, moving forward.
Right. Yeah.
And they have to know what's in your mind. And that's another big thing that we teach inside of the program, is exactly how to do that in a way that your partner can hear you and not feel attacked.
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
know? But it's something that's really big among women
Yeah.
for sure, is standing up for yourself and saying what it is that you need, want, and where you're coming from.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
and helping the men come down from the defensiveness, feeling attacked, feeling like they have to turn it back around on their woman and attack back, you know, and come down from that.
Right. And that's just one stance for a lot of guys. I hear, you know, if they'd only known, in a lot of cases, that their wives were feeling a certain way, or they, you know, and it was never really expressed.
Right. That's a big one.
You know, and
Yeah.
so I try to get people to understand that too. It's like we can't operate on something in terms of like repairing it or fixing it if we're not aware of it.
Right.
Right. Right. And it's really not fair, you know,
No.
to then by the time you speak up, it's already too late for the person to make it right, because you're done now. But it's like, if you had spoken up sooner.
Yeah, that's
Right.
a big red flag for any guys that are listening to this, because we get so many men who come into the program who are really, their marriages are hanging on by a thread. The women are done. And for you guys that are in a marriage and like your woman, your wife is not talking, she hasn't really been a big talker throughout your marriage, and she hasn't sort of told you exactly what she wants and how she wants it and what works better for her and what she makes up about what y'all's dynamic is, that's a big red flag. That's a warning sign that you need to call us and set up a call with Monika or one of our enrollment coaches, because that's a danger zone right there. And when men come to us, they're like, I thought everything was fine.
Yeah, or they don't know, like if I say what would their complaint be? What was the thing that they were wanting that maybe was not there? They don't know. If you don't know the answer to that question, that's not a good sign. Like and it's not up to you, obviously. Like, she has to know how, she's going to have to learn how to speak up herself. But a lot of times there's been an association formed in childhood or maybe in previous relationships where you have to make a choice between maintaining connection and authentically expressing yourself. And so people learn, and not just women, but everyone learns at some point, to say, I'm going to choose connection over being authentic right now.
Exactly.
And because we need that, we need connection with other human beings. And so if your partner is scared to come up to the line and speak their truth, ask yourself, am I making it safe for them? And then if I am, and I know that I am, and they're still not talking, then we really need to learn how to express these things so that you can't work with something that you don't know what it is. You have to be willing to shine the light on that. And that takes a huge risk.
Yeah.
And I know, like, even I'm thinking of a couple of different people that I've worked with where And they were both women, but I've worked with men too, actually, where they didn't know what their own boundary was. Like they didn't even admit to themselves, I don't like that. I don't like what my spouse, I don't like how they were talking to me. And I feel like a line has been crossed. And so now I feel shut down.
Mm.
They don't even know that that's what's happened to them because they don't feel like they should feel that way. They think that
Yeah.
Yeah.
they don't give themselves permission to have a limit or
Yeah.
a line, or that
Yeah.
they think they're being overly sensitive. Well, I shouldn't be bothered by that. I should blah, blah, blah. But the truth is if it is bothering you, if it is a line that's being crossed, you have to own that. That's what we
Yeah.
mean by owning it, is
Yeah.
to just admit it. Like, this is the limit. And even if you judge it, even if you think I shouldn't have that limit, even if somebody else doesn't have this limit, I do.
Right.
And if you are going to be in a healthy relationship with someone, you have to be willing to want to know what their limits are. You have to be willing to want to share your own without shame,
Right.
and expect that part of being in a relationship with me is knowing me
Right.
and where those limits are so that we can function well together.
1000%.
Yeah. And that, and I think a huge part of that, all of this, what we're hearing is, and what I'm hearing, I should say, is that there's a specific skill set that is not being taught for people in.
Well, we teach it.
I should say at a young age, in schools.
We're not taught this in school.
No, at all. And
Our parents definitely don't
that's
teach
the
us
big
this
point
stuff either.
here, especially with Kelly saying, talking about these flags, and a lot of guys are not even aware that those red flags are being waved. A lot of that comes because this stuff is not being taught to people.
Yeah.
So it is important that if any guys are hearing this, and any ladies who are going through this experience, to understand that because this is not being taught, and if you are listening to this, there is a place to get help. And it's we're getting on a call with Monika and one of the coaches, because we do teach this stuff, because it is not being taught enough by enough people. And this is why people find themselves in so many problems and so much trouble.
Yeah. And it's so foundational. Yes. Yeah. So if you guys are listening to this and you're resonating with any of this, and you either this is new to you in terms of even understanding it conceptually, or you're aware of it, but you haven't been able to make the changes because you have, some deeply entrenched beliefs, like I'm selfish if I have a boundary, or whatever the case may be, you can book a call with us for free. It's just a discovery call, monikahoyt.com/talk. And that will just help us to kind of get an understanding of what's really going on. Let's break it down. Let's understand the dynamics, and what are the barriers to having those healthy dynamics internally or in the relationship dynamics themselves, and then propose some recommendations. It's for some clarity. And if you feel like that would be something you need help with, you're welcome to book a call. I'll put that in one of the comments below, or in one of like the comment on the post for this video. Then before we go into what we can do about this, I want to kind of touch on some extreme examples. Well, actually, there's a couple more that are not as extreme, but I just want to mention a couple other, people pleasing is a big sign of poor boundaries, psychological internal boundaries. If you're a people pleaser, losing your voice and oversharing from a place of neediness and not really knowing where the line is also, I think, a poor boundary. And if you feel like you're being used a lot, if you have this chronic experience of they're taking advantage of me, they're just using me, then you have to look at, all right, where are my boundaries, and are they clear? And if they're clear, what do I need to do to hold those boundaries?
Right.
The extremes of not having good boundaries are affairs, right? Infidelity, financial abuse, domestic violence, like verbal abuse where you're name calling, or speaking, even speaking for your partner all the time. This is what's going on for you. This is why you did that. I know that's what you were thinking, just assuming that you can speak on behalf of your partner's intentions. I would say that can become verbally abusive if it's not something that you check, and if it's just part of the fabric of your relationship.
And a lot of men, especially men who are like the breadwinners, right? Or they make more bulk of the income. We see this a lot. when with boundaryless guys, when they get pissed or when they get triggered, they'll use money or the finances, and they'll withhold it. They'll cut off credit cards, and we call that financial abuse. It's a form of domestic violence, and we see that happen a good bit. So if women, this is happening to you, if guys, you're doing this, that's a big red flag. That's a problem, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's such a good point. And anytime if you are recognizing that you're communicating your boundaries frequently, you've made it clear, you're speaking up, and somebody continues to cross the line, continues to do things that they know are violating that limit for you. That's a form of abuse. And you really have to ask yourself, why do I really want to be with someone who doesn't care where my lines are? You don't really, we would never recommend that.
Yeah.
Even though we are all about like owning our own reactions, changing the way that we view things, taking our power back and not being victim to what other people are doing. But spending a lot of time with someone who's repeatedly communicating that they don't value or honor your limits, there's not anything good that can come from that. You can't trust that person. You're not safe with that person, psychologically safe. And so I think we overlook that and we think, well, if they're not, calling me really horrible names all the time, and they're not hitting me, then it's not abuse. But repetitive boundary violations is abuse.
Yeah. And a lot of couples do it to each other.
Yeah.
Especially two that are boundaryless. It's like, I'm going to violate your boundaries and not give you what you're asking for. I'm going to violate yours and not give you. And it's just like this cycle that they get caught up in. It's like, you're not meeting my needs. You're boundaryless. So I'm going to do this in retaliation. Yeah. And it's just this retaliatory, very toxic, sort of vicious cycle that couples find themselves in. With some of the couples that we worked with, There's no judgment, like for anyone listening, there's no judgment if you're finding yourself being a person like this, or you're with someone who's like this. It's like, we're here to help you come out from underneath the grip of these dysfunctional behaviors and patterns. Like, that's what we help you do. So there's no judgment. We're just like calling it what it is, so that you know, and that you're aware of, hey, yeah, I'm in this. It's dysfunctional. Right.
Yeah. And I've honestly never met somebody who hasn't at some point had poor boundaries, either for themselves or with others, because they just didn't know the difference. We just absorb what we live, and then we become that. It just, it's not, but once we are aware of that, and if you walk away, this is one of those times where you really want to tune into yourself. If you walk away from an interaction and you're feeling really bad and you're not sure why, and you're ruminating on it and something's really bothering you, it's probably because somebody crossed a line and you're just not admitting it to yourself, or you think you shouldn't have that line, or you're just overreacting or whatever. But right or wrong, it's so good to know yourself in that way. Maybe it is an area of hypersensitivity, but anybody who's a loving spouse who's got your back is going to want to know what those are, even if they don't feel like they have to be responsible and that they're not going to have to change who they are to accommodate that. But that they will be aware of that and want to try to find a way to, to work with you that respects that to the best of their ability.
Exactly.
Right. And then that's just a loving choice. So it's not like good boundaries means hey, that's your problem. That's not my problem. But because in a healthy, loving relationship, we do want to contribute to the environment of the relationship and what we put into it. Like the biosphere concept, right? Yeah. What we breathe into the relationship is I'm going to be breathing that back in again at some point. Yeah. So, we want to find that balance between holding our boundaries and having that line, but also then being able to do that dance with each other that is as respectful of those limits as possible. And here's the thing, limits change, lines change. You can have a corrective emotional experience if you're with someone who then is really honoring of your limits. and you have areas that are really sensitive, over time they become less sensitive because you're not having to fight so hard to protect yourself.
Right.
Now, when you feel safe, all of a sudden the things that were triggers are not as much triggers anymore because you're like, well, I can let that go. It's not, you're not responding from that old place. So that's something to keep in mind too. Because I think people get like scared, like this is always going to be how it is, but
Yeah.
it's not. You really do come out the other side where you're strong as an individual, but now you can function as a wonderful team with your spouse. And that's the goal. That's really what it's all about.
It is.
So what do you guys recommend? What should people do in terms of what are the top tips for developing healthy boundaries?
You have to learn a new skill set, and you have to learn tools, because it's like we said earlier, this stuff is not taught. And that begins with moving your ego out of the way if you're a man or a woman, and stepping out of your comfort zone around a lot of this stuff and actually getting the help that you need.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I always say, get honest with yourself.
Yeah.
You know, are you really truly happy and fulfilled and just joy filled in your marriage? Are you really? Right? Are you really in that place? I mean, are you guys communicating openly? Can you talk? Can you tell each other how each other feels without people feeling attacked or hurt? Without it turning into this big blow up argument. Those are all really big red flags and warning signs and things that don't make you very happy, right? They're just super stressful. So it's like, get honest with yourself, because if you don't have these skills and you're not truly happy and fulfilled, like, don't you want to be? Like,
yeah, you don't have to settle.
you
No.
know, if you're
That's really the
honest,
message.
right?
Yeah.
And it's like, just because you're in these dysfunctional cycles doesn't mean you're with the wrong person. It just means you don't have a skill set that you're lacking, right? That you need. And you have to get honest with yourself. You have to learn how to catch yourself in your flavors of dysfunction. If you don't know how to do that, you're never going to be able to get outside of the grip of the dynamic. You have to realize that you're in the pattern, that you're, you know.
That's the first step. So yeah, you have to get honest with yourself first. And then once you have that clarity around this is what's real for me, whether it's uncomfortable to recognize or not, now I can work with it. Now I can make a different choice and I can change it. And it's uncomfortable at first, but it's always so completely worth it. The other thing I just want to mention before we sign off is that if you commit to a blame-free relationship, you will find out what your boundaries are. If you don't know, well, what are my lines? Stop blaming and see what happens. Next time you want to blame, this is what I had to do. Once I stopped blaming, I started to realize, like, what was at stake for me, what mattered to me, what were my fears, what did I need to ask for, what did I need more of, what did I need less of, and what did I need to do to get that for myself. And I never had more clarity about my own boundaries until I stopped blaming. So that would be the first thing that I would recommend in trying that, because that's when you're not blaming, you're able to really see yourself clearly.
Yeah.
And just never be ashamed to own your limits, even if somebody else might take issue and say, well, that's ridiculous. I don't need that. Or that doesn't bother me. That's not relevant. Okay. What's relevant is knowing yourself and speaking the truth of that, and coming from a place of knowing that you deserve non-judgment, right? It might have implications. They might have feelings about it and they're entitled to it, but that doesn't take away from the validity of whatever it is that you need to own and who you are and what your lines are, because everybody has a different path. Everybody has different histories. Some people have more trauma than others. Right. Some people have much hard, like things that they have to get past that takes a lot longer than other people. So comparing is a complete waste of time. It's like, it's a moot point. So
Yeah.
just own who you are, start there without apology, and that will also allow you to give others the same grace, like your
Absolutely.
partner.
Yeah.
Right on.
100%.
So for those of you guys that are listening either live or later in the recording, please post your questions below. We will go through and answer those, and book a call if you want to talk more about this, if you are looking for help around this issue, or just want to get some clarity around if this is really what is coming up for you, if it is a boundary issue or not. We can help you.
Yeah.
And that's it, you guys. We'll see you next time. We'll see you next month. And Ned and Kelly, I hope you have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank
for
you.
joining.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.
Bye.